Hello guys, and in today's video we are going to conclude both the Nestjs tutorial and the Prisma tutorial where we're making a small project that would combine all of it, where we have the database and the connection with the ORM, which is the Prisma. And if you haven't seen my Prisma tutorial, I'll send the link, the playlist down in the description below. And the Nest, and if you coming from Prisma and you haven't seen Nest, I'll send the link as well there in down below, and we will be combining both of them, those tutorial, in one project, and that project will be regarded as blog. So a simple blog project, a backend API where it contains the logging, authentication, all of those stuff, plus the posts will be created based on the categories, and you could delete categories, and posts can be created only those who are logged in at that moment of time. So I'll be doing that in our current project, in our project. So when we look at the structure of the blog, in code structure, it will look like this again, like a tree structure, where we have our main, our app, our Prisma modules. So these color purple are the modules itself. So we'll be having Prisma, auth, users, categories, post module, and for each one we'll be always have controller and service, except the auth, whereby it has two additional modules, and that is similar to what we have done in our previous tutorial, and that will be JWT and passport. So for the final project, it will look like this, whereby we'll be having the auth modules here, categories, posts, users, utilities, and those kind of stuff. First, we will initialize our Prisma DB. So what I'll be going to do here is yarn Prisma DB push to create the test.db here, and the schema.prisma will look like this. We will be doing it together later on. And let's run the project. So what I have to do is I have to go to the project and then say yarn install. I think I have installed everything. Then I'll say yarn start dev. I will start the project, which is the blog rest. Now to test the endpoints, we'll be using Insomnia. Insomnia is a really nice tool for anything that it's similar to Postman. So if you're using Postman, you could use Postman. I'll be using Insomnia. In the previous video, if you knew, I was using the Thunder client, but Thunder client was a bit difficult to handle or to do the endpoints, because I have to fumble with it. It was a bit more it was more energy consuming compared to this Insomnia dashboard. So what we're going to do first, we'll be creating or registering a user. So what we'll be having in our endpoint is localhost 3000, auth, register, and we'll be having a name as John, and email john@gmail.com, and the password will be 123456. Now the moment I send it, it will give me access token, which can be used for other purposes like getting my profile or all those stuff like that. So for example, let's try to use the endpoint that I've created, something called me, and that will showcase our profile. So auth profile, and what we have to do is add the token that we have here and send it here, and what we'll be receiving is the ID and the email of the person that is currently using. So the auth token is meant for authentication purposes, and the backend would recognize you, that you have logged in, and then that's your data, that the person who's logged in. Now let's try to log in as well. Let's try to use this logic, and we'll be using john@gmail.com, and password will be 123456, and the moment we send it, we'll receive an access token. Now the other thing what we have is creating a post. So if you don't have an access token or it's not invalid, so what we will be doing, go to the JSON. So just add the data, so for example title and body. The moment you send it, it will mention unauthorized, because this one is authenticated. If you are if you didn't log in, or if you don't give the bear token in the header, it will give you an error similar to what we have here. So we have some authentication validation to prevent anybody creating posts if that person doesn't exist. So let's add our token here in our bear, and let's create the post here again. And the moment we send it, you notice we received ID, title, body, and user ID. Now that's fine and good and all. We will be having as well category, but how are we getting the list of posts? So in here, what we'll be having is localhost 3000, and that will be with users. Now the moment we mention users, we'll get a list of users, but for now we just have john@gmail.com, that one that we have created. Now how are we able to see the posts? So you could either mention the endpoint of the post, and then you'll be seeing all the posts with the user ID, or if you want to have another way of doing it, which is getting the posts based on the user. So it'll be, what we could do is users, and then with a query called posts, and we just do that, and then the moment you do this endpoint, it will give you for each user the post that the person has done as well. So we could do the other way around as well, where we have the posts, and then we will be showing the posts of the users. So we have queries enabled in this feature, and we'll be going through that as well in the blog project. So enough with that. What we'll be going to do is we will start from the beginning, from the ground up, everything from zero to from there, right? Let's try to replicate everything until here. Yeah, let's start. So in here we have a complete empty project, so we initialize first the Nestjs project. So what we will be doing is nest new, and we are just going to say nest new dot. Hey, we got a problem here. Oh yeah, because I don't think I have the folder. I think I need to create the folder. Let me create from the beginning. So let me delete this, and let me get out of here. Actually, let me delete the whole thing here and create the terminal. Alright, here we will have Nestjs, and then here we'll be saying nest new blog rest. That will be my project. I'll be using yarn. You could use anything, which is npm pnp, which is really nice. I think I have never tried pnp, but if you're interested with that, just try it out. I think you won't have any problems with it. Alright, it's done. So now we open that project, which is the blog rest, and what we'll be going to do is first we will test out if it works fine, if the project has been installed properly, and yeah, it works fine. So now what we are going to do is delete some of this stuff, like we don't need this, we don't need this, and we don't need this. Dot screenshot delete. Alright, so delete those three, and update our app module. Now map module enable to this, and then we'll be removing this as well. Now we clean this up. Next part would be we initialize our Prisma. So what we have to do is yarn what was it again? Yarn Prisma init. Was it npx Prisma init? Yeah, it was npx Prisma init. Alright, need to install the following packages. Sure, go ahead. Try and install it here. Alright. Am I in the correct branch? I think I am in the correct branch. I hope that I am in the correct branch. How am I sure if I'm in the correct branch or not? get branch. Okay, yeah, I think I'm in the correct branch. Just something's wrong with this place. It shouldn't show master, it should show like release or something like that. Oh yeah, because Nestjs always has that, so I need to remove it. So RF, you don't have to do that, but I have to do it. So now we have installed our Prisma. Next part would be we are going to our Prisma itself, and here we'll check if everything is fine. And yeah, except what we'll be using is not Postgres at all, but what we are going to use is, as usual, SQLite. So what we'll be doing is file, and in here we are going to say dev db. So now that would be our database in SQLite, and how we are going to do that is going to provider. Here we are going to change it to SQLite, and now what we are going to do is we are going to mention yarn prisma generate to generate, but we don't have anything. Wait, didn't I do it properly? Yarn prisma generate, it should have, right? Yarn prisma generate. Oh yeah, I didn't install it as well. So yarn add prisma. So I didn't even add the package. Make sure to add the package. I forgot to add the package itself. Now I mentioned yarn prisma generate. It will generate in the backend, but there's nothing here, so I'll just say I'll mention here just one model, and that model will be called user. And in the user, what we'll be having is an ID that is a type of string, and in here what we are going to say is the ID, which is the primary key. But instead of an integer type for the Prisma, what we are going to use is UUID, which is a different type of unique, like a unique identifier. It's meant for identifying every data that you have. Instead of an integer, you will have a string of numbers, random numbers, that is specifically meant for each data. Really nice. Yeah, and this one usually I try to use it instead of the integer itself. So in here what we are going to say is UUID, and it will generate any ID using this one. Now next part would be we'll be using email, and that will be a string, a type of string, and it should be unique. That will be a type of unique. Now another thing we'll be using is password, and that will be a type of string. Now what else do we need? I think for now that would be enough. And what we are going to mention is yarn. So our initial migration, we'll mention yarn prisma migrate, and then we'll say name, and then initial shall migrate. That will migrate our Prisma and as well generate the components for our user model, all the functions and those stuff. Now the next part would be we are initializing the connection or setting up the Prisma connection in our Nestjs. So if you were in our Prisma tutorial, we just had to say Prisma equals to new Prisma client, but in Nestjs is a bit different because we have to follow the framework's way, where the Nestjs will initialize the client itself, any kind of services, be it controller or the Prisma service itself. So what we are going to do is what we could do is create a service through this source. Sometimes you will see people using creating a service here and say prisma.service, but what we won't be doing that. What we will be doing is creating a module for Prisma itself, and we'll be using our similar what we have done before, we're using our nest CLI in order to create the module. So what we'll do is nestg, and we'll mention module, and that module is called Prisma, and it will generate the module itself. And another thing we need is, what did I do? Okay, it didn't, okay, it didn't refresh itself. That's kind of weird. Now another thing, we need Nestj service, which is the Prisma. So we are creating a Prisma service as well. Now in here in our Prisma we are having, and I'm worried why it has a problem with restarting. Let me check here. Let me reload this browser. Now let me remove this file and let me go to the Prisma to service. Now the next thing what we have to do is any service that we have through the project, it's using injectable. So what we'll be going to do is we'll extend the Prisma client and we'll be using the Prisma service itself here. So what we'll do is just extend, and we'll be using the Prisma client, which is coming from the generation that we have done with the yarn Prisma generate. So this is the generate the Prisma client. Instead of saying new Prisma client, we're going to extend it. Now another thing what we need to do is, before the project starts, like whenever the project is running, we want to initialize the connection between the backend and the database. So this one, if you notice in API or REST API, usually you just connect once and then you get it. That's what you call stateless connections. But with the backend and database, it's usually a stateful connection where we have to have the connections for a long period of time, for obvious reasons, such as we don't want to have too many connections with the database to reduce any problems regarding that. Like for example, if you have too many connections every time, every kind of endpoint, then the database will have too many requests, too many responses to fulfill, and this might leak some data while like it does some unexpected things when we do those kind of stuff. So in order for us to prevent that, we're going to initialize the connection when the Nestjs project starts. And how do we do that is by using the Nestjs lifecycle. So I haven't talked about Nestjs lifecycle before, and I think I'll just go through a bit. And it just, whenever Nestjs starts, if you notice here when we say yarn start dev, there is some certain lifecycle when it's starting, and it needs to initialize some of the modules, and then when it initializes the modules, it needs to initialize the controllers, the endpoints, and those kind of stuff. So it starts step by step, and we'll be using that lifecycle similar to React, if you know by React by now, where it has certain lifecycle when you are starting the component, when you're deleting the component, when you're destroying the component, when it's updated, when the component is updated, and those kind of stuff. So Nestjs has that kind of lifecycle. So what we are going to do is we'll be using an interface, and that interface will be called onModule init. So implements on module init. And as well, when the Nestjs project broke, we want to as well have, whenever like the Nestjs server stopped, we need to have another lifecycle, and that lifecycle will be called on module destroy, if I am correct. Yeah, okay. Now the TypeScript and the IntelliSense is telling us to implement those interfaces, so let's implement both of them. So now we will try to implement the onModule init, and how we're going to do is, so since we are using the Prismix client itself, which is the object itself, instead of previously we have had it as new Prisma client, to make the connection in the back database. Instead of doing that, we have to do a bit differently here. So what we have to do is, when the module is initialized, we are going to connect with the database, or like with the connection with the database, and that will be the property called connect, which is coming from the Prisma client. So it's a function that allows to connect with the Prisma. Even the information itself is saying connect with the database, so it's connecting with the database itself. But what we are going to do is not a normal function, normal function, but we are going to use Prisma like promise void, so to wait until the connection has been completed and then continue with the module initialization. Now I forgot, I don't think we need to have on module destroy, and it's a bit different compared to like how we are going to do with the Prisma, how it's destroying. But since it's just a small project, we are not destroying any connections after it finished. The server has if the server closes. But for production grade, you may have to check out the documentation of how to stop or how to remove the connection when the server stops. Now we have our own module in it, we have connected it, and that will be it with the Prisma service. So that's how we are initializing the Prisma service. Now in the Prisma.module, let's check if we have the providers, and that is the Prisma service. Now, in order for us to use this Prisma service in all the modules, so like all the modules, as in like these users module, the post module, the categories module, and auth module, we have to export this and export this service, so then other people can use it. So what we're going to do here is say export, and in here we are going to mention Prisma service. Let's add the comma, and that will be it. Now we have initialized our Prisma and our Prisma service. Now next step would be, we are going to work on the users module. So let's start with the users module. So let's complete our user module, which is the user model itself first. So what we are going to do is, we are going to add several attributes that we were missing prior to this, and that will be the name. Of course, a name needs to be there, or a user doesn't exist here, right? The name needs to be known. Who is the author? Who is the person's name? We know the email, but we don't know the name, right? Yeah. Now, created at, we'll have that as well, just for clarification. So we will be having date, time, and it will be created at the moment, like the moment we created it, it will be created. So that's the now function with the decorator. We'll be having updated at, and it won't be using the default, but what we are going to use is another decorator, and that will be called updated at. Now I think that will be it, and we'll be putting more values later on. But yeah, for now this is it, and we are going to create our module for user. So let's say Nestj, and we'll say resource, and the resource would be users. And what we are going to do is, we are going to regenerate all the endpoints of the REST API. So we'll be using that CRUD operation. Yes. Now it will create, what does it install? It doesn't need any other packages, I think. All right. Now we have our entity. Oh, it creates the entity as well. I don't think we need the entities itself, so let's delete this. And we don't need the controller spec. We don't need to have the user service spec. And that would be it for it, like I think. Okay, yes. Now we will go towards our DTO. So what we are going to do is, actually let's check first our controller. So our controller, we have create, find all, find one, update, remove async, like the usual, anything related to the CRUD operations. Now we'll go to our create user DTO. In our create user DTO, what we are going to do is, we are going to add name and that will be a type of string, and I have no idea why my TypeScript has a problem, so let me load again. Yeah. Okay, there's some problems. So in the meantime, I'll just create whatever I was doing here. So I'll say email, and then I'll be having password as well. And okay, there is some problem with it. I think something's wrong with my CPU, and my CPU is screaming now. Why is it screaming? Come on, don't scream. Alright, now that would be the name, email, and password for creating a user TTO. Now for the other one, which is update user TTO, it will be using as well create user, and I think it has done its job, so we don't need to do anything there as well. So that will be update and create user DTO. Now what we have to do is we may need to update here. No, there's no need. So we'll be going towards our user service, and user service, we have to replace this number first to a string, because now our ID will be a string. The next part would be we have to import our Prisma service. So we'll say constructor private Prisma service, and in here we are going to mention for create, we'll be just doing that this dot Prisma service dot create. Actually, it's not create, it will be, we have to mention the model itself, and then we have to mention create. And in the create, what we are going to mention is an object, and the object requires a data, and that data will be create user DTO. So that will be our data that we need to import, and I think that will be it for create. Now the next part would be find all. So we'll be saying this dot Prisma service dot user dot find many. Like these things, we have already done it in a normal express. So in the normal express project, in our Prisma, in our previous videos, in our previous playlist, and you could check it out what all those functions are. But simply put, they are all CRUD operations that interact with the database or through Prisma, and Prisma is the ORM or the middleman, allowing us to have the functions for us to interact. For example, be it creating, finding, deleting, updating, all those kind of stuff. Amazing. It has all of that. So now we have this .prisma.user.find many, and that will be it for find all. Now the next part would be find one, and what we are going to say is this .prisma.service, and in here we're going to say find unique. So we'll say user and then find unique, and then the unique part would be the ID. So we'll say where, and in here in the where we are going to ask for ID, because the user's object is the ID is the unique identification, or it could be as well email, but for now, for the moment, for this project, we are going to use only ID, whereas you could use as well the email to check who the person is. Now another thing we are going to do is we are going to have an update function. So if here we'll say this dot Prisma service, and then we are going to say user, and then we're saying update, and what we are going to update is whatever data we are receiving from the update user DTO, and we are going to say where, which is the unique identification, and that will be the ID itself. Now in the delete, we are going to do the same thing as well, whereby we'll be having Prisma service, and in the Prisma service we're going to use user, and in here we're going to say delete, but in the delete we are going to say the where, and that will be it, and it will delete the user itself. Now that will be it regarding the service, the controller, and actually let me remove that. So let me remove this. So all right, so that would be it for the controller. Prisma user service connect to interacting with the Prisma service, and so what we have to do is go to our users module, and we may have to import the Prisma service. But hold on, think of it. Now, okay, now if you run it, it will throw an error, right? Because we never imported our Prisma service, and that Prisma service needs to import it to the user module. So if you notice in the error, is available in the user, is not available in the, please make sure that argument Prisma service is available in the user's module context. So it's talking about the user service, so the first one, which is Prisma service, should be inside the user module. But think of it, Prisma service will be used across the whole project. Like, think of it, we are going to use it in the categories, posts, we are going to use it in the authentication, everywhere. So isn't it a lot if we have to import it everywhere in the user module whenever we want to use the Prisma service? I think for me, yeah, since we're using the Prisma or the Prisma module everywhere, why don't we import it to one place, and then it will automatically push towards every single module itself. And the one place that we are talking about is the app.module. So now we have here imports with this Prisma module, but how can we use the Prisma module into the users module without importing in the users module? And there's a decorator for it. Everything in Nestjs we have a decorator. So when we are going to go to our prisma.module.ts, and what we are going to do is we'll be using an @ sign here above the add module. So we're going to use something called global, and global allows us to automatically import this module or this service, anything that we are exporting from this module, to each and every module that requires the Prisma service. So if you notice by now, when I added the add global, it had no issues at all, so we don't have to worry or import it. But don't use it for every place that needs to import or for require dependencies together, and just do it for those that are being used across the whole project. For example, in this case will be the Prisma service, which will be needed across the different modules. So we'll be using the @ sign @global. Now we have the endpoint for the users done, and anything related to users. I think we have changed some of the stuff in our Prisma, which in our Prisma schema. So we have added name, and we have added created that and updated that. So let's update this. So we'll go to our here we are mentioning on Prisma migrate, and we are going to say user model. So now it migrated and created the functions required for handling the pass the name, created it and updated that. So now let's test it out, and what we are going to do is we are going towards our endpoint, and that will be called localhost users. So that would be the endpoint. Now we don't have any data, and we have to create some data, right? So what we are going to use is our Insomnia. Here you could use Postman or Thunder Client if you think it's really great. So we will use that. Now we are going to create the new request endpoint, and that will be called create user for now at the moment, but later on we will register through the authentication. Now I'll be using JSON here, create, and in the body what we are going to say is HTTP localhost 3000, and it will be users, and I think that will be it. Now here we are mentioning name, and that will be John. That's how we always start. John, and we are going to have an email that is based on john@gmail.com, and we are going to have password that is based on 1 2 3 4 5 6. Now let's create, send it, and voila, we have our ID, name, email, password, created that and updated that data. Now let's say get find all. So let's see if it works fine. And yes, it works fine. Now let's say, for example, find one. So we'll just use based on the ID itself. So we will use that on the endpoint. And yes, it works fine. We are getting the user based on the ID for that particular. It's not a list. If you notice here, it's a list, but when we are doing this, it's not a list at all. So it's just getting this particular person. Now we have completed our users module. Now the next part would be categories, and basically categories is based on the posts. So posts could have a lot of categories, and categories could have a lot of posts. So it's a many to many relationship between posts and categories. So we will start with categories first, finish it, and then we will go towards the post itself. So let's do that now. So what we are going to do is create the model, and that model will be called category, and capital category, and in here we are going to use name as a string, and we are going to use as well our ID, that will be a string, and we'll be using default ID, and we are going to have the default now, and updated add as well. Now that will be it for the category. We don't have to have fancy stuff, just the name itself, and that will be it. Later on we have to do the relation between the post, and as well in the user we have to have a relation between the post as well. So now what we are going to do, as well as previous, we are saying user, and in here we are going to mention category model. Now that will be our migration for the next part. And in the next thing, what we are going to do is we are going to create our module that will be called Nestjs resource categories. We are going to create that first, and it will be based on REST API with all the endpoints involved, and we have our categories here. Now let me clean up here a bit so that you could see everything. So in here I'll be removing this one and this one and this one, because we don't need the entities as well. So let me remove those, and okay, it's removing. Now the next part would be, we are going to update our create category, and create category will just have the name itself, and that will be it. And for update category, we don't need to have to do anything. In our service, in our controller, we don't have to do anything here. There's no problem except the plus sign. I don't like the plus sign. So let me highlight everything. Actually, how to highlight again, I forgot. Okay, all right. Now let me remove every single one. Now we will go to our service and remove all the type. Oh wait, that's it. Okay, service itself. In here we are going to change to string. Okay, let me reduce here, and yeah, now we are going to change here a bit, same thing as what we have done before, Prisma service. But before that we have to add our constructor Prisma service, that is a type of Prisma service, and we need to change this to a normal Prisma service. And we are going to say here, for example, category. Is it working? No. Oh, okay. Yeah, forgot. I need to generate yarn Prisma generate. Actually, it should have generated, but I think my TypeScript has some problems. I'm not sure what the problem is with it. So let me go again. Yeah, it has a problem. So let me reload it again. Why do I have to always reload now? So it's kind of buggy. Okay, let me check now. Oh yeah, come on, don't scream please. Okay, we have the category, and we have create category. In the create, we are going to give the create category DTO that we are getting from the parameter, and in here we are going to say this dot Prisma service category, and it will be find many, and in here we are going to mention this dot prisma service dot category dot find unique, and we are going to check for the ID itself. We could do this way or the other way around, and here we are going to do that too, where we are going to say return this dot prisma service, and we are going to mention here category and update, and here we are saying the data update user category DTO, and we are going to say the ID, and in here we are going to mention return .prisma .service remove, actually it was delete, and delete will be using the where ID. And yes, if you didn't follow along, just do a slow motion here. It's fine because it's the same thing as what we have done with Prisma service user. Just instead of using user DTO, we are going to use the category DTO. Now we have finished the categories, and let's test this out as well. So what we are going to do is create a new endpoint, and that is called create category. Now this one will be a post with JSON, and in here we will mention HTTP localhost 3000, and it will be based on categories. Yeah, let me make it correct. And in here we are going to mention only name, and the name would be let's say programming. That would be a category, and if you notice, we got a category called programming, and we will be having as well architecture. So let's create that, and as well we are going to create what should we create as well? What else should we create? Let's just say, come on, I forgot. No, never mind. Let's leave it like that. Now, in the list here, what we are going to do is we are going to mention the categories, and let's see what kind of categories we have. We have architecture and programming, and it works fine. Now, we finished with the categories itself, but we'll step back a bit, and what we will be doing is we want to validate the data that we are getting from the user itself. For example, now what if we just give it an empty value here, and when we give an empty value, it will create with an empty value, and we don't want to have that. So what we have to do is, as what we have done in our previous tutorial, we have to do validation, and that's what we are going to do now, doing validation in our users and category before moving towards the post module. So in here what we are going to install, as what we have done before, and I hope that I don't mess up this time, is yarn add class validator and class. Oh, okay, nice, my terminal already recognizes it and don't have to mess up. So class validator and class transformer, these two are the components for us to use the validators. Now the next setup would be we have to go to our main.ts, and what we are going to do is we are going to say app.enable. What are we enabling here? I forgot. What are we enabling here? Where is the global? Is it global pipes? I think it's global pipes. So in here we are going to say new validation pipe. That will be an instance of the validation type thing. Yeah. So, and I don't know why it's crying so much today. I think I need to clean my PC. Yeah, it's dusty here, so I need to clean up. So we have validation pipe, and we initialized in our main.ts in order for us to validate all the endpoints that we receive through the DTR and body. So what we are going to do is, first we will do this one, and what we are going to say is minimum length. I think this would be in the decorator, and it will be number one, and I'll say not empty is not empty checks, and then as well we'll mention is string, because sometimes you may have not string at all. So the length would be, I think, just 2. I think. All right, now we are going to create again, and let's see. For example, we just say number. It should supposed to not even allow. Yeah, now it must be longer than equals to 2 characters. It works. So that's it. You just had to enable it, global pipes, and then is not string is string. Now we will be doing that here as well, and let's try it out. Test, and yes, it is working fine for this part. Now the other part that we are going to validate is the user DTO. That will be the create user DTO. In here we are going to say is string and is not empty, and we are going to say is minimum length will be 3, and we are going to add that here, and we are going to use all 3 of them across the whole place. So we'll be using it here, and we are going to use here, but it will be a bit different. We are going to use in here, we are going to say is email, so to check out if it's a proper email. Now we have done validation here as well for the user, and let's test it out. What we are going to test out is the email part, if the email part is correct or not. So let's remove the @ sign, and let's just send it. An email must be an email. Fine, that's really good. Now let's just say, for example, if it's a number here, what will it say? Yes. Now it is working fine. It is working for the user and category. Now we could move on towards the posts. So let's initialize our post module. We'll say Nestjs resource. Oh, I realized that you guys cannot see my whatever I write here in my terminal. Can you guys see it? Well, I just realized that the camera, which I'm pointing towards to, and the terminal was close to each other, so possibly you may have not seen all the things that I wrote here most of the times. But I think so. Let me change it here. How do you change the terminals? So I want to replace this guy to this guy, but it's not working at all. I think I'll just close this, and then just remove both. Actually, I'll just put here, and in here we are going to say yarn start. There. Now I think you'll be able to see all the endpoints that I write here. Now we are going to go towards the schema.prisma, and we are going to complete with the other model, and that model will be called posts. So that would be the post itself. Now we are going to do the same thing as previously. We are saying the UID, and we will be saying title now here, and the body for the body of the blog post. Now we will have created ad, and we will be having updated that as well. Now another thing that we may need is the category. So it will be a many-to-many relationship, but between the user and post will for each post will be made by one user, and user will have a list of posts. So what we will be going to do here is, since it's a one-to-many relationship, we'll be having the foreign key here in the post. So what we'll do is user ID, that will be a type of string, and another thing we are going to do is user, and actually let's not call it user but an author, so let's call it an author instead. And the author will have, what they have will be the user type, and it will have a relation, and that relation will be with the so let's say fields, is it fields, and then we will have references as well. So references, and we'll be having here, and we'll be having user ID, and references will be ID itself. What am I missing here? I think I'm not missing anything here. Otherwise, and relation field of author on model post is missing an opposite either format or okay, that's fine. So I think I need to add it here as well. I thought that it's crying for something else, but it's fine. All right, I knew that I need to have this one, and that will be a list of posts. So that will be an array. The next part would be, we are going to have a many-to-many relationship between category and post, and we don't have to have a foreign key between each other. We just have to showcase the relations. So we'll be saying posts here, and it will be a list of posts, and the next in here we are going to say categories, and it will be a list of category. That would be the relation between the post, category, and user. So we have completed our model. The next part would be, we have to initialize our resource, that it will be called posts, and within the post we will do the same thing again. We will be having these endpoints that we are talking about. Now let me remove this, and this. Alright, now we'll go to our create post DTO. We are just having title as the string and the body as the string. Well, we will be having here as well is not empty. So what happened? I don't know. Empty, and we will be having as well is string, and we will be having minimum length of 3. And we'll import that one as well, and we are going to copy this. We'll be pasting in here, and let me format this. Alright, now that's for creating. Updating will be similar, it's fine, because the title and body. The post controller, we just have to change the plus icon. So let's, okay, again. Okay, now remove this plus icon. We will go to our post service, and in the post service we'll be having, instead of number, we are going to say string instead. Now in here we are going to remove this, and what we are going to create first, before that we have to add our constructor. The constructor will contain the Prisma service, and let me fix that. And in here we are going to say this dot Prisma service dot create, Prisma service dot create, but instead of create like this, we have to say post and create, and in here we have to say the data. But as you may have known, I need to again fix it, restart it, but for now let's skip that. We'll say return this dot Prisma service dot post and find many, and find many won't have anything here, and that will be for find many. Let me copy this, and let me remove this and replace what we have here, and what we are going to use is find unique. Find unique will be having where, which is the ID itself, and in here we are going to remove this. We are going to say return this dot prisma dot service dot post dot what was it, update, and then update will be having data itself and the update data, the update post DTO, and we will be having the where ID as well. And in here we are going to have return desktop prisma dot post, and then it will be delete where with the ID. Now okay, now we are going to reload this. All right, it still has problem. Interesting. So I guess, oh yeah, I didn't migrate. Yarn Prisma migrate, and I have to mention post model, and I think now we got it. Now we have to reload again because I didn't save it. Okay. Yeah, we have here, but we have some mistakes in create post DTO, and I understand what we have. It's giving an error because remember we need to have the ID of the user ID. That user ID is coming from the user itself, and what we are going to do is we are not getting from the endpoint because that person doesn't know the user ID itself, but we are getting based on the authentication decorated that we are going to do in the future. Now at the moment we are going to mention here just a replace user ID, and that will be a string. Now it shouldn't give any errors now, so and at the moment we cannot test the post because of we don't have any user authentication in our project. But let's just assume that it is working fine. Let's hope it is working fine, and we'll be testing out when we have finished the authentication. But before we are going to authentication, no, I think let's go authentication, then later we'll do the other feature that I was talking about. So let's move on towards the authentication. So what we have to do here is similar to what we have done previously in our previous project. We'll be having JWT password strategy. Those two strategies, we will be having controller and service, and we'll be having the parts regarding the guards for authenticating, authorizing the different people that are using the project. So let's start initializing our auth module first, then we'll move on installing the components required for us to install the JWT password and the guards, set up the guards, and then after that we will go back towards post and create a post right after. So in order for us to initialize our module, auth module, what we are going to do is step by step. We're not doing the CRUD operation like what we have done before. So we'll say nest g module auth, so that'll be the first the module itself. We'll initialize that, and then we'll say nestg service auth, and it will create a service in ours. So that will be those two that we need at the moment, and let's remove this service.spec. Now in the auth service, we are first not going to do anything, but we are going to install the stuff. So what we are going to do first is the passport module, which requires for login. When the moment it logs in, you could enter the endpoint, which is the controller. I forgot to add the nestg service, actually controller auth. So the endpoint, for example login, will be able to give you the user that he has logged in successfully. So we are going to install the stuff that we need, and that will be yarn add passport. What we are going to say, Nestjs passport local. That will be adding all the dependencies that we need for passport local. And another thing we need to do is we need to import or install the passport local dev dependency. So say yarn add types. Before that we'll say yarn add and then the dev dependency, and here we'll say passport local. The next thing what we have to do is we will import in the auth module our passport module. Say imports, and in the imports we are going to mention passport module. So that's the first thing that we need to do. Let's import that through Nestjs module, and what we'll be doing is create the folder called strategy. Actually, a simpler way. So we'll say strategy. The strategy will contain all the strategy we need, like local and JWT, but for now only the local. So local strategy g.ts. You don't have to do that, but I feel like this is really nice to have, similar like we do local.strategy.ts. So in here we'll say local strategy, and that will be a class that will be having as an injectable, because it's a provider here. So we'll say injectable, and what we are going to say is extends passport strategy, and the passport strategy will be called, so let me import this. All right, and it will be based on the local strategy. So we'll import our strategy here coming from passport local, and we'll import this part first. Now the next thing would be, we have several functions that we have to finish, but first we'll go set up our constructor here. What we are going to do is we are going to change how the strategy works, and what we are going to change is we won't be using username, but we are going to use the email instead. So that's what we are going to change here. Now another thing we have to use a validate function here, and in here we are going to ask for the email and the password itself, and we are going to have to import our auth service here, and the auth service will be coming from here. So let's create some functions that we may need in the future. So what we are going to do here is validate user. That will be one function, and the validate user will ask for email and password. That's one. And what we are going to do as well is, what else do we need here? We are going to as well say login user. Is it? Or let's just say register user, and it is based on, again, it won't be this part, but it will be based on register user, will be based on create user DTO and create user DTO. So now in validate user, so validate function, what we are going to say is const, and we'll be using async here, and that will be called user equals to await this auth service validate user. Validate user will ask for email and password. Now in here we are going to ask if not user. If the user is not, then we will say throw new error, new authentication error, authentication exception. Do we have that? new authorized exception, and I think it's not authorized exception, it's unauthorized exception, just the unauthorized exception. Let me check here. Unauthorized, okay, without capital, and we got unauthorized exception. Now if their user exists, we'll just return the user itself, no problem with that. Now what we are going to do as well is we will create the endpoint here, and that will be in the controller. What we are having is the auth service itself, and the auth service will be imported here. Now in here we are going to have a function, and that function will be called login, and the login will be asking for is we are going to use the request like what we have done before, just for temporary reasons. So request, and we are going to use request itself. Alright, so in here we are going to ask for, so let me change this, it's coming from here, and it will be called request operator, and in here we are saying return request dot user itself. Now we'll be having as well register, but for now we won't be having here anything. So we'll say, for example, body. That body will ask for the create user DTO that we have created from the user DTO, and let me put this from comment, and we'll just return this dot auth service dot register user, and the register user will have create user DTO. Both of them will be using a post method, and this one will be called login, and this one will be called register. Now another thing that I want to add here is me, and that will be an endpoint. I think let's just say profile itself instead of me, and that profile itself, what they will be having is coming from request again here, request, and it will be request and request user thing, and then in here we are going to say it's a get method, and it will just have an endpoint called profile. So I'm setting up here all the stuff, because now this is where things are going a bit different, a different route to what we have done in our previous tutorial. So in our auth service, usually for us to use the invalidation, what we have to go is the user service, and we need to import the user service in order to validate. But in order for us to use the user service to get the user based on the email itself, what we need to do is we need to import the whole user module into our auth module, and the auth module will use that module, users module, whatever exports in the service into our auth service. That is a way of doing it, importing in the auth module, but we are doing a bit differently this time, and we are going to use something different, and I'll show you how. Before that, we still have to export this service in order to expose the other modules to that this service exists. So it's a user service, and we'll expose that. Next part would be we are going to the auth service, and what we are going to say here, we won't add it in the constructor, but we are going to add it here. We say users service. It will be a type of service. We didn't initialize it because the user service now is in the private, not the constructor. Constructor, we initialize the project. So now in the constructor, what we are going to have is something called module reference. So it's called module ref, and let me put that here properly. It's coming from Nestjs core, and what module ref is doing is it's getting the reference, as the name suggests, it's getting the reference of the module. If you understand how C++ works, like pointers and reference, so it is getting the reference of the module itself that is through the Nestjs lifecycle, whatever in the project is. So what you could do is check any ref module or any module within the auth module. So you could have a module within the auth module, or what you could do is you could check outside of the auth module, and that outside of module should, like anything that is exported or anything that is out there, you could use that module itself, whatever it's exposed, right? So which module are we caring about? And that would be the users module. So it's getting the reference of the users module, but we are getting the exposed service and that exposed service is running prior to the auth module. So what is happening here is the moment the user service initialized and it's exposed in the life cycle through the Nestjs project, the module ref will get the reference of that module with the service, and then it will initialize this service towards our user service. So to showcase how it goes, and I think I have talked too much here, like usual. So what I will do is this dot user service equals to this dot module ref, and what we are going to say is get, and what we are going to get is the service itself, and that service is called user service, and we are going to use this part, and it could be a string or an object, doesn't matter, but we are going to use it in a string, and we are going to use it this way. So now we initialize the user service based on the module reference. That's how you do it. So you just get the module reference, and then you just get the service itself, and that service should be exposed already. Now in the validate user, what we are going to do is, let's just make it a promise here. Let's just make a promise, and let's return something here. Let's return something. So in order to prevent any problems, and we could see if it works fine. So let's say, for example, let's put it as a string. Now in here what we have is, so Nest could not find user service element in this current context. So when it's saying this, that means it didn't, so I forgot something, and that thing was that, as I mentioned, you could either get the reference within the module, which is the authentication, or outside of the module, which is out of the authentication module. And we, as a default, it will check through the authentication module, whatever context or whatever module we are in, and if it doesn't exist, it will throw an error. So what we have to do is we will have to use an object here as a second parameter, and that will be strict. We are mentioning false. So this will mention we could get it from outside of it. I think I have done the job, right? No? Okay, let me remove the string. Okay, now it's working fine. Instead of using .name, which is the string itself, just mention as the type of user service like that, and it works fine. Now we have the user service, which is a bit complicated but much more better. Instead of importing the module itself and then having a dependency right there. So what we are doing is we are depending on the Nestjs itself to get the service itself and see if it exists through the Nestjs lifecycle. So what we have here, our module ref, which is the user service, and what we are going to do is complete the validate user. So we'll go to async. So we'll say async here, sync, and what we are going to do is const user await.users.service, and what we are going to find is the users.service here, and what we are trying to search is depending on, so we are creating another function, and that function is called find one by email, and in here we are going to say find unique in the service, user service, mind you. So in here what we are going to mention is where email, which is this email. So we are getting the email itself. Now we are getting that email and putting it here, so we'll say email, and we are getting that email. Now another thing we have to do is check if the password is similar to what we have. So what we have to do is, now our password is not encrypted or like using bcrypt, we just have the normal password, so we could just make a simple validation. So what we could do is just if user dot password equals to password, right? Actually we'll just say not equals to return false, actually return false, and then other than that we'll return user itself. So if it's not similar to that, we have a problem, and so return false, otherwise return that this user exists. So in our local.strategy, it will say if it's not user, throw unauthorized exception, or else we will return the user itself. Now in our controller, we will do that. In here, the moment we log in, we will use our authentication strategy. But before we are adding the guards here, what we are doing is we are adding a new, we are modifying our previous guard that we have done prior to this in the tutorial, and what we are going to do is create a guard that is extending our local strategy. So what we will do is, there is a CLI here, we have guard, and what we are going to say is guards. So what we are going to do is create a local auth guard. So so it will create a folder, and that folder is called guards, and let me delete that. And what we are going to have in our local auth guard is, instead of having all of this, what we are going to do is we will extend our guard. What was it again? It's coming from Nestjs. It's coming from, so let me say import, and it is coming from passport itself, Nestjs passport. So we have a guard, auth guard, yes, auth guard. So the auth guard is the thing that we need. So auth guard, and the auth guard will be the type of local. So this is the local strategy that we want to use. Now what we are going to do is we are going to our controller. In the controller, what we are going to say is use guards, this decorator, and we are going to use our local auth guard that we have just created. But another thing we have to do is we are not done yet. We're going to auth module, and in the auth module we have to import our local strategy as the provider. So yes, now we are done with the authentication of local auth guard, and to test it out we are going to log in the user. So we'll go use the endpoint called login user with this endpoint auth login, so that will be it, and we will say email and password. For now we won't get any access token, we have to do that as of yet. So we'll send this, and yeah, we got a problem. What's the problem? With the use of undefined. So what problem do we have here? local strategy has no problem. So let's check out what we are receiving. So when we do that, what do we receive? Cannot read property of user undefined. Okay. What is the issue here? I have no idea. Validate user. Oh, validate. No, that's no problem. So let's log this out. So let's try to send it. So what do we have here? It's not even running fine here. Are we even getting the email and password? So let's log this email. We are getting the email, but there's a problem with the find one. So what we have here is, oh, alright. I should have used find one by email, so let's use find one by email. Let's use that, and now let's try to run it again, and we still have a problem, and I have no idea what's the problem now again. So I figured out the problem, what's the issue, and it's quite a weird one. You know, it's like quite a weird one. Let me clean this up. Let me remove this and let me put this. Now, alright, when I'm talking about it's weird, it's because, alright, now let's say when I send it, right, it gets an internal server error. And if you notice by the message, so let me make it large. If you notice by the message, I cannot read property user of undefined. So when I click this, the first line, it will show me user itself, this object user. So it seems that the Prisma service is not even initialized. The Prisma service is not initialized at all. And I'm not sure why it's not initializing. When I'm using the one that I talked about, which is the module ref, it somehow has a problem where the Prisma service is not initializing before the user service, so therefore it has the old version without the initialization of Prisma. Whatever it is, I have no idea what's the issue, why it has this problem with this module ref. So I guess we have to use the other way around, where we have to import the users module first. So we import the users module, and then we need to use the we need to put this instead of module ref. So we need to put this instead of module ref, and yeah, it works now. So when oh no, it doesn't work anymore. Convert the circular structure starting an object with constructor property parser with. So what's the problem now? Oh yeah. So when I go to the controller request.user, now when I send this, it will work fine. But yeah, it's quite interesting. that I'm not able to use module ref, and the module ref was working before in the previous project. I'm still using module ref in the previous one, but in this one it's not working at all with Prisma service, and I cannot initialize it, and it will have some problems. So to solve the problem, again, just import the user's modules, and then we will go to the auth service and just import private service user service. Again, I really didn't prefer using this way, or I preferred the other way around, where it's not depending on each other. But yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do. So now when the user is having, when we got the user, so when I send this, it should throw an error, and it is working fine. And if I put this like this, it should throw an error, but it didn't throw an error, and it's possibly because I didn't put a proper validation. So I'll say or. So now if I add that, it's supposed to still cannot read property. Okay, find deny is not saved, so cannot read property password of null. So yeah, not equals to result or. Alright, now when I send this, it's saying unauthorized. So not equals a result. Let's say instead of result, let's change it to user itself. So that will do the fix. Find one by email, not user, user the password, and then in the controller I'll be getting the request.user, and in the UI I'll be receiving the user if I got the name right. Now that would be this passport module. I didn't know I didn't expect it to be this long and having this problem, but it's fine. Like there's always a problem issue to fix, challenges to understand. The more you know, right? So if I did it in production grade, that might have an issue, and I would have taken for a long time to fix. But luckily I've learned it from the tutorial. So now what we are going to do is we are going to install and do the JWT stuff. JWT regarding registration, we will give the access token, and as well when we are logging it, we are giving the access token. Then we are going to say, for example, the profile, whenever we click an endpoint that has this guard that is JWT, we need to get the token from the header and then destruct it, and then get the user and return the user itself. Or for example, when we are creating a post, we are using that ID from that access token. So what we are going to do is first install the stuff that we need, and that will be yarn add. What we are going to install is Nestjs badge passport. Is it JWT? Yeah, JWT, and then passport JWT. Then we need to add the type of the JWT. Alright, and we'll mention yarn add that dependency, and we'll say types, and that will be passport JWT. Then in the next part is we are first creating a constant file that has the constants.ts, and in here we are saying export JWT's constant, and what we are having here is an object that will have secret key secret. So that will be the constant. Another thing what we are going to do is going to our module. In the module, what we are going to register is the JWT module. So JWT module dot register, and in the register, so let me comma this, in the register we are going to have secret secret will be the JWT, I think, instead of JWT. So in here we are saying JWT dot secret key. In the next part we have to mention how long the is it the sign option? Is it the sign option? Is it? Yeah, expires in, and we'll say 10 hours. Now that would be for the JWT module. Now another thing what we have to do is create our JWT auth JWT strategy. So we have to create here a new file. We'll say JWT strategy ts, and in here we are going to say export JWT strategy extends passport strategy, which is this, and I need to say export class, and we have to mention the injectable. Okay, I need to import all of this, and in here we are going to say strategy, but it is coming from Nestjs JWT strategy. No, it's not coming from here, but it is coming from passport JWT. Okay, so we got it. The next part would be we are going to have as well validate. In the validate, what we'll be having is a payload, and that payload is the one that we are having as we will be having a sub that is a string, and we will be having ID, actually email, as a string as well. That will be for destructuring the token, JWT token, that we will be having, and what we will return is the ID, and that ID is called payload sub, and then the email as well we are returning. Now nothing, what we need to do is we need to change some stuff in the constructor, and what we are going to change is so what we are going to do is extract JWT extract strategy. I have no idea how to write it. Like, you have to make sure that it is always correct, and let me get the code from my own. So where is extract? Need to, no, not here, that will be here, extract JWT. So I need to check how it is running, so let me check. Okay, so JWT from request, so it is JWT from request, so getting the request from the bearer token. That's not needed anymore, and this one will be writing here JWT secret, it's coming secret key. So that will be the JWT strategy. Now another thing what we need to do is go towards the module, and in the module we have to mention JWT strategy. So import this, and we are good to go. We are just missing several things. So one, we need to add the guard, and to implement the guard. So what we are going to do is nestg guard, and in here we are going to mention JWT guard, and it will be created in here. So let me remove this, and let me copy this part, which is just enough similar to what we have here. Let's remove that, and in here we are going to change, instead of local we'll use JWT. Now another thing we need to do is implementing the guards, which is for the authentication purposes, right? So we will go to the controller. So what we'll be having is here a guard, use guards, and in here instead of local we are going to use jwt guard, and I hope that it is coming. It's not even coming close. Okay. Oh yeah, I have to say jwt auth guard, and it will be, let me save that and let me import this. So it is importing. Now another thing what we are going to do is we are going to, the moment we are logging in, what we want to give is the person with the sign. So we want to give the sign option, or like the token option. So we want to give the token towards the user the moment they log in or register. So what we are going to do is we are going to the service and we are going to have login, actually we'll just say sign, and within the sign we are asking for the email and password, and within it we are going to first import our jwt service, which is coming from the jwt module. So let me change this a bit. So let me say jwt service, and it is coming from here. Now another thing what we are going to do here is return this .jwt sign. So what we are going to sign here is the ID, that will be the what we are getting here is not email and password, but what we are getting is a normal user. So the moment we are getting a normal user, so user.user, so we are getting a normal user that has all the stuff that we need, and what we are putting in is the ID, and the sub would be the user. Actually, sub, okay, how did we do it before in our JWT strategy? The ID is the sub, the ID is the sub, the email is the payload. So what we are doing here is the sub is the ID and the email is the user.email. So that's for signing in. So how we are encrypting it, so we are using this way, where the sub is the ID and the email is the user.email. Then in here as well, decrypting, the ID will be payload.sub and the email will be the payload email. Now in register user, how we are going to do, before that, let's go to the controller and let's say this .auth service .sign. So that would be the one that we want to use, and it will be signing based on request.user. Now in profile, we don't want to do anything in here, and we are just returning the request.user. But for register user, we are registering as well, and nothing has any problem here. But what we are going to do first is new user. So that's the first. So what we are doing here is create a user, and we are going to use the Prisma, the one that we have done in our user.service, which is create, and we're just creating based on the DTO that we have here. And what we are going to return is this dot sign, because we already created it, so we could use the new user as the new object. Now I think we are good to go in sign register user. In here as well, sign register user. Now what we are going to do is check out what we receive through the login. So when we send this, it's supposed to give us an ID, and it gave us an ID. but there is some issues, I think, because we are giving a string. That's why it's not giving us JSON anymore. We have to give it as a string. So let's change that a bit, where we are going towards our sign, and in our sign, instead of just doing this way, what we are going to do is that so it's giving an access token. So we'll say const access token, and it's not a wait because it's a normal one. Now what we are going to do is return an object, and that object will have access token equals to access token. Now when we return, when we are sending it, it should give us the access token, and we receive the access token. Now for example, we are going towards the endpoint that is called profile. So let's take this this token, and that token we are going to go to our controller, and that controller is called use profile. The profile is getting the JWT token deconstructed, and what it's going to give is all the data that we have from the user, whatever token we will be getting. I'm not sure if we are getting the user itself, but let's see. What we are going to do is we are going to the me, which is pointing towards localhost 3000 auth profile, and we are going to add our bearer token in the auth here. So wait, I think I didn't remove this, so I'll use that token, remove this and replace with mine. Go to the body. Actually we don't need to do anything, just send it, and I think, yeah, it didn't work. It did not work at all. And what would be the issue here? So when we go to the JWT guard, it takes the JWT strategy. So the JWT strategy, did we import the service? Yeah, we imported it. So are we messing around something here? What are we messing around here? So when I go log payload, what am I receiving here? Actually it won't work because, yeah, I'm not receiving at that point of time. What am I missing here? It seems to be that I was missing out. I thought I don't need this, but I'm missing out the ignore expiration. So I should have this ignore expiration equals to colon false, because in our module we have as well ignore like expiration, which is 10 hours. This one is ignoring expiration one, and we don't want to do that. So ignore expiration will be false if you add that in JWT strategy. Then after that you try to log in again. So try to log in again, and when the moment you log in, we will go to the me, and we are going to remove this, send it, and we are receiving the ID and the email itself. So we are done with the JWT passport and anything regarding that. Now we could move on creating a post based on the JWT token. So what we are going to do is we are first creating a special decorator, and that decorator is getting our ID and email, so we could use it in our post service. Similar to what we have a decorator in the parameter, we will make a parameter as well, a decorator that is called me, that contains the email and ID from the request. So what we are going to do is first create the decorator itself, and that decorator will be it has similar functionalities, so we are just creating it here. So we are going to say me, and it will be in the auth. So that will be the guard that we are going to do. No, it won't be a guard per se. Do we have Nestjs decorator? And it will be called me in the auth. Yeah, we have a decorator. So in here we are removing this guard because we don't need it. We are going to use this decorator, which is me.decorator. So in the me.decorator, okay, it's not it's not the one that we wanted. We didn't want to have this. We really wanted the guard, because this decorator, I don't tend to use this one. So we will go to me.guard. What we are going to do is change this. As you've noticed before, we always replace this because we didn't need it before, but now we need this. And what we are going to do is we are going to use something called the context, which is coming from the parameter. And here we'll say switch to HTTP. And what do we have here? Get request. Is it? Yeah. Okay. It's either giving project. Okay. Alright. So we'll use async here. And remove this. Remove this. Because we need to have the const request equals to, and what we need to do is return request.user. So what we are doing here is whatever we are getting from request. So if you know by now, in our request we always tend to have the request.user. That's what the passport is doing. Be it JWT or passport, they always put the token or whatever you do inside the request. So what we are doing with this decorator is getting, the moment we call this decorator, we are getting the request, and the request will have the user itself. So that's what we are trying to do with this me decorator. So the me guard decorator is still not the correct one, so I think I'll just start from the ground up. What I will do is export a const called me, and I will say create param decorator, which is coming from the Nestjs module. So Nestjs common. So let me remove this as well. So, and then as well, let's remove that. And in here, what I will be having in this module, what I will be having is 2, that is data. That's the first parameter that we need to use, and we'll just say unknown. And the second part would be, I think let's just use any. So let's say any, and the second part will be called context, which is the execution context or the life cycle, whatever is happening in the request response. And what we are going to do in here is so what we'll be having in the context, so what we are going to do with the me decorator is meant for the body, or like the body, it's similar to the body decorator, where we are getting something from the request. As you have seen in the controller, what we always have is, when we're using passport, is in the request we always have the user. So what we want to use is, we want to use the request, and based on the request we want to check if the user exists, not if an if statement, but we just want to return the request.user. So whenever we have this decorator, we always get the user if it exists, right? So what we are going to do here is, we are using async. We are going to use async, and what we are going to do here is const request, and the request is coming from the context, and in the context we are going to switch to HTTP, and we are asking for the request itself. Now another thing what we are going to do is just return. So now we have the request, and the request will be based on this user. So this context, basically anything that is an API, like it's like, be it if it's a GraphQL, RPC, a WebSocket, or anything, you could check the context within it, anything that is the endpoint. Now for now, because we're using a REST API, we just have to care about the context regarding the HTTP. And within the HTTP, we assume that we have an object that is called user. So that will be the decorator. Now let's test it out. We'll go to our controller, and in the controller what we are going to do is we are going to put in the body, instead of this, what we are going to say is me, and in the me we are just asking for me. And what we are going to do is just return the me object. So we are assuming here the moment we have the JWT guard, we already decoded it and put it in the request of the user. The moment we are calling the parameter will have the body or like the data of the user request of the user. So we will go there and we will send here, and if you have noticed, it has no issues. So now with this me, that's what we wanted to do. With this me decorator, we could use it for creating the post, and that's what we are trying to do now. So we are going to go to the post.controller.ts. In the post.controller.ts, what we will be having is not only the body, but we are going to have the decorator called me, and the me will be in the first or second parent, doesn't matter. But me assumes that we already have request.user in the request. So in order to do that, what we have to do is using JWT token, JWT guard, to decode the bearer token into and then put it in the request.user. So what we are going to do is we are saying use guard here. So we'll use use guard, and in the use guard we'll say JWT guard that is coming from the auth, and we will use that from the auth module. So we'll be using this. And now for the create post DTO, if you notice we have user ID. Now whenever we create post, it would initially give an empty body or empty user ID and will throw an error, but now because we have the me, what we are going to do is we will destructure the create post DTO, and we are going to do is user ID, and within it we are going to add with our me.id. Now we'll test it out at the moment. What we are going to do is let's test out without it, and let's see what it will give us, right? And then let's see when we are using the me.id. So we will go to our create post. In our create post, it is asking for us a bearer token. So let's copy there and put it here. Now in our JSON, we are going to say, for example, we are going to use lorem ipsum and the body as well. Now we will try to send it. If you notice, it gave an internal server error, and that is because of we didn't give the user ID. So now let's try it out with the user ID. So what will happen next? So now let's create the post again, and if you noticed, it worked fine because we have given the user ID. Now another thing what we want to do as well is giving the category, and what we are going to do is we are creating another post, and that will be called title 2, and here we're saying category, and the category we are giving the category ID. But we never finished this part with connecting the category and post, but I don't think we will it's necessary at the moment of time. Now what we'll be going to do, we are going to move towards the query side of it, whereby we are doing the thing that I have talked about before, where now when we list out posts it will be fine, but if we want to showcase the user itself, we are not able to do that because it's not enabled for us to query the user through it. Or the other way around as well, we can't do users, and we can do users, but we can't do users dot and then question mark and then posts itself. We can't do that. So let's try to enable it. How are we going to enable it? By using you guessed it right, a decorator. So a decorator called query. Under the hood, it's using the request query from Express. So we are going to use that as a decorator. So before creating the queries that we need in order to have this nested query like post to users, what we want to understand first is how do we know what kind of nested queries can we do in Prisma. In actuality, whatever you have in the query, we have to put it in the Prisma in order to have this relation between the post and user. How do you know that? Is by checking when you go to find many and then you make an object here, and in this object what you could check is something called include. This include will nest or do a joint between those related models, and then you could list out their data from different relational tables. So what you could have in the include is, so let's check in the include. You will see that we have count, which is unnecessary for us at the moment, and we have author and categories. So those things we are able to use and put it in the query in the URL. So we'll only do the author and categories. So when you check the author, you will notice that what you could do is, so let me go to the author. So what you could do author is, for example, just initialize as true, which means that anything within the author relation, you could get the whole data, like just get the whole data from the other relation, which is the author. Or what you could do is specify what kind of data you want to get from the author itself. But at this moment, for this project, we just care about author. If it's true, that means get the whole data of the author. Similar to author, we could do that for the categories as well, and it will be either true or it should be like null. So basically it doesn't exist in the categories itself. So that's what we're going to do for the post, and it will be similar to the categories and the users as well. So let's start with creating a DTO, a query DTO. Usually I will create a class for each query that I want to specify in the URL. So let's create a file called query DTO under the post. So query.dto.ts, and in here what we are specifying is a class, and that class is called post query DTO. Within it, what we'll be having is a boolean, two booleans, right? So that will be the author, and the author will be a type of boolean which is initialized as true. And I'll talk about why initializing as true later on. So that will be categories as well. So categories will be saying it's a type of boolean and it will be initialized as true. So next thing, we have to put this in our query, and how do we do that is by going to the post.controller. In the post.controller, you will notice here we have find all. In the find all, you just add an add decorator coming from so you just add an add decorator, and that add decorator is coming from Nestjs common, as everything as you should be. Everything that is shareable is always in Nestjs common, and this query will be using, just create a variable called query, which is a type of post query, that the one that we have done. Now in here, now whenever we call this endpoint, this will be used as the query. Another thing what we have to do is we need to move this query in the find all. So first foremost, let's check out what we are getting from the query itself. So let's say query, and let's log it here. Now we will go towards here, and what we are going to do is just normal posts. And what do we see here is an empty object when we do initially. The second part would be when we do this and mention author itself. Now when you see here, you will see author itself. Now another thing what we could do is categories. Now when you do that, you will see as well categories. Now how about when you combine them together? So author and categories, I want to have them, all of them. So now when you do that, you will receive as well the author and the categories from here console log. I thought when you initialize as equals to true, it would make sense or do something, but it seems it doesn't make anything when we log it. So the more you learn, right? So I noticed that you don't need to do anything in it. So just mention author and categories, that will be it. Now another thing what we need to do, we know whatever we are getting, so whenever we put something in the query, we will receive something from it, and that will be through the query, and the query will get an object. So if initially it will be an empty, but if you put posts or categories, it will give posts or categories within the query. Now next step would be we will go to the find all function, and what we are going to do here is we'll just say query, and that query will be a type of Prisma dot post include. So if you don't know Prisma, you could get all the types through the Prisma itself. Prisma, the one that we generated, so it has all the types. So this type, for example, will showcase all the types for including between the relations, all the available ones, which is author, categories, and underscore count. But we don't care about count, but author and categories. So those two, that's what we care about. Now next thing what we will be going to do is in the find menu, we are going to say include, and within the include we'll just say query itself, and that will be it. Now in the controller, you will notice that it will give an error. So to prevent any errors, we'll just put in the query itself here. Now another thing we have to care about is we need to make this as optional, because sometimes you don't want to have this query as initialized. Now in here, when you do this, let's just refresh it. If you notice, you will see that it works fine now. When you see this post will have an author, this post will have an author as well, and this post has an author. So when I remove this and just give this itself, it gives me the author itself. But now the issue will be, now there will be an issue with the normal one. Now if we don't have the query itself, right, so when you say post, you will notice there's an internal server error. And the issue being, as we have seen prior, is we are getting, when we are making as an empty URL, this query is an empty object. It won't be defined as null as what we wanted. It will be defined as an empty object, and that's will cause an error towards the Prisma, because it doesn't know what this object is, because it doesn't know what type it is. It doesn't know, is it a table? It doesn't know, so it will throw an error that I don't know whatever that is. I can only able to include which are the author, categories, and underscore count. So what we have to do is to make this query to verify if this is empty, if this object is empty, or if it's not, if it's empty, make it as null, define this query as null. If it's not empty, define as query, so just put in query. So what we are going to do is, it won't work what we always do by doing like equals to like not equals to, like query not equals to, and like if you do tertiary operator, I'm not sure what it's called. If we just do this, for example, if this doesn't exist, then do this null or query. It won't work, and we could try it out as well. So when we do this, if you notice, it will skip an internal server. What we have to do is make this empty object as null. So how do we do that? Is by creating a helper method, and we will create first a util folder. So under the util folder, we'll just create a file called index.ts. So this function will check if the object is empty or it's not. And I tend to forget about this logic, and so I copied somewhere, I put it somewhere here, which I put all the code that I need to remember. So this is the code to check if it's empty or not. So this is the isEmpty function. So this function will check if the object is empty, or if it's a type of object, or if it has any problems with it, whatever it is. So this function will return true if it's an object. If it's not an object, it will return as not working, or it's as false, as false. So when we go to the post controller, now what we are going to do is we will be using isEmpty, the thing that we are going to that we have done. So we are going to use this isEmpty and put in our query. So then right after, what we could do, okay, let me check. Okay, does it know that we have imported isEmpty? Yes, it does know. So now next thing is, when it knows if it's empty, that means we are defining as null, or else if it's not empty, return as query. Yeah, so that would be it regarding that, right? So this isEmpty will check if it's empty. If it's empty, that means it will return as null, otherwise it will return as query. So now let's try it out again and see if it works. So we will go here and post works fine. Now we could try it out with author as well, and if you notice, it works fine as well. Great, it works. Now we will do that for all of them. The post, the user will have the post, and categories will have the post as well. So we'll do that quickly. So again, we will do the same flow. We are going to create a DTO, and that will be called query dto.ts, and in here we are going to say export class user query DTO, and in here we are going to mention that will be post only, and it will be a type of boolean. Okay, now in here we are going to go to the controller. In the controller we are going to say query, and within the query we are going to mention that it is a type of user query DTO. Next part would be, we are going to change the find all, but before that let's just do whatever we have done before. So isEmpty, and isEmpty will check the query, and if it's empty, that means it's null, otherwise return as the query here. So we're going to import it through as source util. So let me just import it properly. We'll go to the find all. In the find all, what we are going to do is just mention query, and we are going to use prisma.user include. So let's import Prisma quickly first, and then we are going to have our IntelliSense to check if it's user include, and within it we are going to say include query. That would be it for the I think, yeah. Oh, okay, I need to make a question mark instead, and that would be it for the user, and we could check it out as well. So what we are going to do is, let's just say users, and then here we are going to say posts, and it works nicely, very neat. So we have this user has 3 posts, for example, and when we do normal, it shows as well the user itself. Next thing would be the categories. Although we didn't connect them together, but we will connect them now after this. So we will go to the categories, and what we are going to do is same thing as what we have done here, query.dto.ts, and in here we say export class category. Okay, query category actually it's category query DTO, and in here we are going to say posts, and it will be type of boolean, and that will be it. And in the controller we are going to use the query from the Nestjs common, and we'll say query, and the type would be category query DTO, and in here we are going to say isEmpty. So we are going to import it from here. We are going to say query, and then here we are going to say a question mark, null, or otherwise it will be a query itself. Now in the find all, we are going to mention it is query again, and in here we are going to import our Prisma, and the Prisma will have the category include type, and which we have here is include query. Now we have done all the parts regarding the query, where the user could query the post and the post could query the user, and otherwise as well the category with the post. Now what we are missing here is the connection between the category and posts. So usually a post during creation or updating, what we'll be having is it could have during the creation a list of categories, or it could have only one category, or it could have no category at all. Another thing would be during update, it could add more categories or no categories at all. So those things what we are going to update now and in this section, and that I think that will be it. After that we are done with the project. All right, let's clean it up first, where we are going to close everything. Let's clean up everything, because this one takes some time as well to figure out what we are going to do. So let me close everything here. Now we are going towards our posts and categories. So what's the logic here? The moment the post is being created, we could have a list of categories. So that's one requirement. So what we have to do in the create post is something called categories. So it could be a list, categories. Now it will be a list. Now another thing would be, the moment we create those, a list of categories will contain a list of IDs, but as a string. So it will be a list of strings. But in the Prisma, it won't understand, and if you notice, it's already giving us errors. It's already screaming, and that is because it doesn't understand that there is. So let me go to the service. So it doesn't understand regarding this categories. It doesn't know what it should do. So what we have to do is change the create to accept this category connection. So let's first check how the Prisma connects with the categories. So we will go in our data deeply. So within the data, we'll notice the body, title, author, categories created up and those kind of stuff. So what we are going to check is the categories itself. So when you go to the categories, you will notice that it will ask for us connect. So now in the connect, what it could do, so what you could do, when you click or hover on it, when you click, the moment you click, it will go through the node module, which is the Prisma client. Now this connect, similar to what we have done with the user ID or post, it connects with the related database. But now we have a list of IDs that we want to connect with. So when you go to the connect, you will notice something called enumerable. Now when you hover on it, you will notice it is a type of T or a list of type of T. So type of T, which is the type of category. So it could be a type of T, which is one category, or it could be a list of categories. But that list of categories needs to have ID. So it needs to be an object. So a list of object that contains an ID. So for each one. So if you notice in our create post, it is a list of string. So what we have to do is convert this list of string into an object that contains an ID. Or what we could do, which is horrifying, is make the user give us a list of object that contains an ID. But I don't think we should give all the bothersome stuff towards the client, but we need to simplify it, and the simplification will be by just giving as list of string. Now when we go towards the post service, so that's how we are going to do it. So now we are going to the post controller. In the post.controller, what we are going to do is we're going to map the categories that we are getting from the client. It doesn't have to be, the user doesn't have to create the category, but we could have it, and if we have it, we need to map it to a different one, and that different one needs to have a list of object that contains the ID. So we'll create an object here, or a variable, categories, and within it we are going to mention create post DTO categories, and then we'll add question mark, which mentions that this one could be optional. If it has, we will map it, and what we are going to map is a category, and within it we are going to mention each category will contain an ID, and that ID is the category itself, because it's a string, right? So it's a list of string. So now that's what we have done now. So this is a list of categories that contains an ID, and if you hover on it, you will notice it is saying a list of ID. Now next thing what we have to do is we have to change a bit regarding the create. So if you notice, this create post DTO doesn't work anymore properly, because the create post is getting the posts, a list of posts, a list of categories as a string. So we change it towards, as what we have done previously in some of the queries, we are going to use the Prisma create. So how do we do that? If by just changing, so we are using still create post DTO as a variable, but here we are going to change Prisma dot, we are going to change with create input, post create input. And if you notice, the post create input allows us to have the categories itself. So now in here we are getting the categories created at, updated, body, title, and ID. Previously we didn't had it, the categories wasn't expected for in the create DTO. So in here what we are going to do is we are just mapping towards create post DTO, and that will be it. But now we are receiving an issue both in the update, if you notice, and at the same time in the controller. When you go to the controller, you will notice the user ID doesn't work anymore, because when we are using this post create input, there is no type of user ID anymore. So what we have to do is similar to the categories where it's connect, but in this time it's simpler, where we are, instead of doing it like a list, what we are going to do here is just author, and then we are going to mention connect, and within the connect we are going to mention the create post DTO. So create post DTO, and the create post DTO will have the ID itself. So ID equals to user ID. So that's how we are going to do with the author. The next part would be with the category. So what we are going to do is give a space here. Be careful with the curly braces here, and I need to be careful as well. So what we are going to do here is categories, and in here we are going to say connect, and what we are connecting would be just categories, the ones that we have mapped here. So we could make it simpler here, where we are getting the ID, and how do we do that is by spreading this project, this object, and this object, what we are going to do is we are going to get the user ID itself only, and the rest will be regarded as create post DTO. Now in here we don't have to mention create post DTO, but we could just say user ID. Now we have two things here, author and categories. Both of them are connecting with the related table that needs to be connected, and that ID, and they all of them have their ID. For example, categories will have a list of IDs, and it will connect with them respectively. Now that will be for create. For the update, it will be similar to this, whereby we have to change it in order to make this less problematic. And how do we do that is by changing the type here. So we are going to mention here Prisma dot post, was it post here, post create update input, post update input. That will be the change here, but in controller, as again we have the same problem here. What we are going to do is similar to what we have done here. We are going to map everything, and if we have categories, we will just choose the category. This time we won't care about the author itself, because I'm assuming that we already have the author. So we'll just change the update post DTO if we have any, and we are going to connect with the categories as well. And if we don't have it, doesn't matter, because it will do it correctly. So here in the connect, we'll just say categories itself, and that will be it. But we have a problem, I think. What do we have here? I thought it would be the same, but it seems that we don't have. Okay, I mentioned connect. Oh yeah, with an N, double N. Okay, now it is working fine, and we have changed it here. So now it's a bit tricky if you have noticed. Oh, instead of user ID, because we don't have the user ID itself, do we have the user ID in the post? Create post, we should never have the user ID, right? So let's remove that. So what we are going to do is remove this for line 14, and we are going to use the me.id. So in here, let's remove this, remove this, remove this, and in here we are going to destructure this one. So I'll say ID and the rest and email. So this is what we are getting from the me, as you remember. So we'll get the ID, and in here we just use the ID itself. We don't have to even mention it, just ID, and that will be it. Now we made it much more simpler again, and that will be categories connect. We have connected with the categories, and it will be a list of objects that contains with IDs. Another thing what we have done is the author, we have to replace it because it is not working anymore, and we had to use the author connect ID. Now another thing we have done, because of the changes we have done in the create post, we had to change as well the update. And update, we are just checking if we have any categories, and if we do have it, we just map it, change it a bit, and then later on connect with it if we need to connect with them. And yes, that will be it, I think. Possibly for update, in order for us, what we are going to do is, instead of saying connect, we are going to say set. So why we are choosing set here? Connect means that we are always registering, but what if the person wants to remove some of the categories? So what we are going to do is, whatever the person is putting in the body, if the body is giving no categories, we are setting no categories at all. So we'll remove all the categories from that particular post. But if they add another category, then we will add it. And if they add with the previous categories, it will just replace it with the previous categories, and it will stay the same. Yes, I think I got confused with my own words, but yeah, that would be it. Now let's test it out and hope it works fine. And how do we do that? Is by checking our insomnia. So we are going to create a body. So this is a body. Okay, test with category, and in here we're just saying body, and then what we are going to do is a list of categories. So when we do that, so let's say one time we will create with a list of categories and one time without any categories, and see if it works fine on both sides. So we'll go check what kind of categories we have here. We have this one, so let's take this. So let's take this and we'll put it here, and the next one would be architecture. Let's copy this, paste it, and a third one, let's add that as well. That would be test. So take this and let's add that. Now when we send it, it's supposed to work, and it works fine. And how do we verify if it works fine? What we are going to do is check this post, and how do we check it? By saying localhost posts the ID, and we're going to check it here. Oh yeah, I forgot we didn't put query for find. It's fine. So what we are going to do is just say posts, and it's supposed to work. And if you notice, test with category, and test with category. So it seems to be working fine. If you notice, every single person, every single category contains the test with category, and we connected with them together. Now let's try it out without categories. So let's just say it like this: test without category, and let's just create it. And if you notice, it has no problem, no issues, and we could check it out as well in the posts. And we could check here, test without category has no problems. And when we change it to test with categories, it doesn't have a list of categories, but the guy which is the test with category has a list of categories 0, 1, 2, and those kind of stuff. Now I think we're done. I think it was a big project. I thought it was small. I think we're done now. Yeah. So how do we wrap this project now? We have done a lot of things in this project, whereby we create an API, a blog API, that is based on features regarding what we have drawn here. So we have done all of it: post module, categories, users, auth, Prisma, app, main.ts, and all of those services and providers that we have under the modules. So another thing what we have done is checked out some new functionalities like the queries, and we have as well checked how do we do connections between different models using Prisma. And if you had any confusions, just ask me in the descriptions regarding the Prisma, any problems. And you could check me out as well in Discord, or text me that you may need my Discord account, and I'll text you and just let me know, and that I could help you out if you have any issues or any confusion regarding Prisma connection. And I have made the tutorial regarding Prisma, so check it out, and hopefully it makes it simpler in that one, because I'm not using Nestjs there. I'm just using normal Express with a little bit TypeScript. But that will be it. Thank you. And if you reached until here, thank you very much for listening, and hope you liked this tutorial, this project, concluding the rest of the Nestjs and Prisma regarding connection with a project, a complete project. Yeah, take care. Bye.